I didn't cry at the funeral, not because I didn't feel anything. God, no. I was hollowed out, scraped raw from the inside out. Grief had moved through me like a hurricane in slow motion, and by the time we gathered at the old Methodist chapel by the sea, I had nothing left but silence. The wind whipped against the stained glass windows, the Atlantic beyond them restless and dark. Grandma Martha would have loved the drama of it. She always said this town looked best when it was stormy. Like it has secrets, she'd whisper with a wink as we huddled over hot cider, both of us wrapped in thrifted wool. She was the secret. Or maybe I was. The hidden granddaughter no one really noticed, not until now. When the service ended, people filtered out in polite murmurs, damp coats brushing past wooden pews. I stayed behind, fingers clenched around the edge of the program with her picture on it. She looked stern in the photo. Too proper. She hated that photo. I'd wanted the one of her laughing on the porch, flower in her hair, yelling at the seagulls to mind their own damn business. But my aunt, who hadn't shown up once in those final 6 months, had insisted on this one, said it looked more dignified. No one argued with her, no one argued with anyone but me. I drove myself to the lawyer's office. The rain had picked up by then, turning the roads to a mirror of gray sky. Edson Fallow's office sat 2 blocks from the marina, tucked behind a bait shop and a shuttered antique bookstore. The windows were dusty, the carpeting smelled faintly of mildew, and the whole place felt outdated. But he was her lawyer, her only lawyer, and today he was mine too. There were only 5 of us in the room. Me, Edson, my aunt and uncle, and my parents. Yes, my parents. The same people who hadn't visited Martha once during her illness. The same people who dropped me off at her cottage when I was 11 and never looked back. They didn't speak to me as we sat, didn't meet my eyes. They looked polite, distant, as if we were all part of some tedious business transaction. I should have known then. Edson adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began. "I'll be brief," he said, and I remember thinking, good. I couldn't sit there long, not with all those eyes on me, not with the storm tightening around the corners of my heart. He read her final wishes in that flat, legal tone. Her voice was nowhere in it, no mischief, no warmth, just the black and white record of a life's closing statement. The house would be donated to the Historical Society. Her antique jewelry went to charity auctions. A small trust for the church. A donation to the library. And then, "To my granddaughter Alyssa Warren," Edson read, "who gave me back my life when the world had left me to fade, I leave the remainder of my estate, including the liquid assets, totaling $770,000. The room went still, soundless, airless. I didn't breathe, I didn't move. I wasn't sure I could. My mother let out a short, sharp breath, like a cough wrapped in disbelief. "What?" she said, almost a laugh. "There must be a mistake." "No," Edson replied, calmly flipping to a notarized document. "Your mother was very clear. She updated the will 5 months ago, in the presence of 2 witnesses. It's legally binding. She was sick," my father said, voice rising. "She didn't know what she was doing. She was sharper than all of us," I said, before I could stop myself. My voice came out hoarse, scraped from too many sleepless nights and whispered goodbyes. "She knew exactly what she was doing," my aunt scoffed, crossing her arms. "So you get everything?" I didn't answer. I didn't know how. My hands were trembling. I wanted to throw up, I wanted to disappear, but more than anything I wanted her back. The rain hit the windows harder now, like it was trying to get in. I stared at the old radiator in the corner, wondering how something could feel so final and so unreal all at once. "She manipulated her," my mother said, louder now. "She isolated her. She exploited the situation." Edson sat straighter. "You may pursue legal action, of course." "But I should warn you. This will was prepared under rigorous observation. We anticipated potential disputes. My mother turned to me then, finally looked me full in the face. Her eyes were steel, her mouth curled in a smile that wasn't a smile at all. Well, she said sweetly, isn't that convenient? And just like that, I knew. The storm had only just begun. Grief, it turns out, doesn't care about geography. You can pack your bags, hop on a bus from Maine back to Boston, change your clothes and your voicemail greeting, and still it follows, quiet, persistent. Like a stain you can't wash out, no matter how many times you run the cycle. The first morning back, I stood in my apartment kitchen, staring at the toaster like it might blink first. The silence was louder here. In Martha's cottage, there was always something. Wind rattling the shutters, gulls arguing on the roof, her favorite jazz records crackling through the speakers. But here, just the hum of the fridge, the occasional creak of the old hardwood floors, the absence of someone who used to call out my name just to make sure I hadn't wandered too far. My phone had 17 missed calls, 12 from unknown numbers, 5 from my parents, 1 from a number that had my uncle's area code. I didn't listen to any of the messages. Instead, I dressed for work. At the biotech startup, where I've been clawing my way towards something that resembles a career, people don't ask too many questions. Which is a mercy. Because I'm not sure I'd survive if someone said the wrong thing, and I dissolved into pieces in front of the tissue culture freezer. "Hey, Alyssa," my team lead mumbled as I walked past her desk. "Welcome back. You need anything?" I shook my head. "I'm okay, thanks," she nodded, already buried in a spreadsheet. That was it. No awkward hugs, no well-meaning condolences that taste like pity, just the cold embrace of productivity. God bless biotech. I dove into the lab like it might save me. Hours spent pipetting, documenting, analyzing, muscle memory, and muscle tension. I answered emails with brutal efficiency. Said, "Fine," to anyone who asked how I was doing. Ate lunch at my desk. I didn't bring up the inheritance. I didn't even whisper about it to my closest work friend, Ivy, who once helped me move a futon up 3 flights of stairs in the pouring rain. The money was radioactive. I could feel it pulsing in my back pocket, metaphorically speaking, like some invisible target painted across my shoulder blades. What would I even say? Hey, remember how I vanished for a while to take care of my dying grandmother? She left me her life savings. And now my entire family wants my blood on a plate. It was easier not to talk. My apartment became a bunker. I unplugged the landline I never used anyway, kept the curtains drawn. I had groceries delivered, deleted social apps from my phone, and slept in the clothes I wore during the day. I wasn't hiding exactly. I was bracing. Like I knew something was coming, and all I could do was make myself small. The nightmares didn't stop. They weren't about grandma, not really. They were about courtrooms. About my mother standing on a witness stand, telling a judge that I had manipulated a dying woman for money. About Martha's voice, distant and disappointed, saying, "I trusted you." I'd wake up gasping, tangled in sheets, clutching at my chest like I could tear the guilt out by force. But in the daylight, I kept walking, kept working, kept pretending everything was fine. Avoidance became its own kind of grief. I ignored the mail stacking up on the console by the door. I let dishes collect in the sink. I answered work emails at 1 a.m. just to stay ahead of the dread. When the weekend came, I didn't even step outside. People always think grief is loud, sobbing, screaming, breaking things. But mine was quiet, sterile. It slipped into the spaces between things. It curled up beside me on the couch while I watched reruns of shows I couldn't remember the plot of. It sat with me in the lab, whispering that I didn't deserve the peace. And still, the phone kept ringing. The voicemails grew more persistent. Polite concern gave way to thinly veiled demands. "We just want to talk," my father's voice said on the 4th message. That money was never meant to divide us, but it already had. Because in that silence, in the space where my parents' absence used to sit quietly gathering dust, now there was something else. A question I couldn't stop asking myself. What do they really want? It started with the doorbell. Not a knock, not a call ahead. Just that soft, definitive chime, ringing through the apartment like it had every right to be there. I froze mid-step, still holding a mug of tea gone cold in my hands. For a second, I convinced myself it was a delivery. Some neighbor's package routed to the wrong door. But something deeper in me, the part that knew what silence meant, what footsteps on old floorboards sounded like, already understood. I set the mug down, walked slowly toward the door, and looked through the peephole. My mother stood there, smiling. Not her real smile, the one I remember from photographs before I understood how conditional her warmth could be. No, this was the curated smile, the kind she used when meeting new clients at church fundraisers. A little too wide, a little too eager. Behind her, my father shifted from foot to foot, his arms crossed tightly over his chest like he was trying to make himself smaller or colder. I couldn't quite tell. I considered not opening the door. I really did. Just pretending I wasn't home, letting them wander back to whatever corner of Boston they'd slithered in from. But I was tired of pretending, so I turned the knob. "Hi, sweetheart," my mother said, like we'd just run into each other at the grocery store. "Oh, it's been too long." She leaned in for a hug. I didn't move. Her arms lingered in midair for a beat too long before she dropped them with a soft, wounded laugh. "Well, I suppose we deserve that." My father stepped forward, clearing his throat. "We thought it was time to see how you were holding up. You know, after everything." After everything. What did that even mean? The months I spent spooning soup into Grandma's mouth while her body betrayed her in slow increments? The lonely nights by her bedside, wiping sweat from her forehead with a cloth and whispering that it was okay to let go? Or did they mean after the will? I stepped aside just enough to let them in, not out of warmth, just control. Better to keep them in my sight than let them linger in the hallway where neighbors might overhear. They walked in as if they owned the place. "Nice setup," my father said, glancing around with that careful detachment he always wore when assessing something he thought was beneath him. "Cozy?" I said nothing, closed the door, locked it. My mother took a seat at the edge of the couch, smoothing her dress over her knees. "We were just in the neighborhood," she said. "Thought we'd drop by." I raised an eyebrow. "In the neighborhood?" She had the grace to laugh, light and empty. Okay. We drove in, but we've been meaning to talk. We wanted to do this, face to face. Still, I said nothing. My father picked up a framed photo on the console table. Grandma and me in the garden, both of us in wide sun hats, grinning like fools. He studied it too long. "She loved you a great deal," he said, quietly. I watched him like a hawk. That tone, it was almost genuine. Almost. Then came the moment I knew they'd rehearsed. "We just want to reconnect," my mother said, hands folded like she was posing for a church bulletin. "You've been through so much, and so have we." My throat tightened. "You've been through so much." Where were they during so much? Not at the hospital, not at the hospice, not at the funeral, really, not in spirit. They'd been in the room, yes, but they'd hovered like guests at a party they weren't sure they wanted to attend. And now here they were, sitting in my apartment like this was a second chance, like grief had given them an opening. "Can I get you something?" I asked flatly. "Water? Tea? An exit?" My mother's mouth twitched. My father glanced down at his shoes. No, she said quickly. "We won't stay long. We just thought maybe we could have dinner sometime this week. Just the three of us, somewhere quiet, a chance to talk." There it was, the first shadow of the real reason they were here. Dinner, somewhere quiet, a chance to talk. I crossed my arms. "You've never asked me to dinner, not once." "Well," my mother said brightly, "we're asking now." And I couldn't help but think how strange it was that something so simple, so seemingly kind, could feel like a warning. They smiled the whole time, but their eyes never softened. It was one of those restaurants with low lighting and brick walls that looked older than the country itself. A place meant for whispered confessions and polished silverware, where everything was just upscale enough to feel intentional, but not too showy. My mother's kind of place. Familiar, performative, safe. They were already seated when I arrived, tucked into a corner booth like this was a routine dinner, not an ambush. My father wore a navy blazer he'd had since I was a teenager, still trying to dress like someone respectable. My mother had on pearls. She always wore pearls when she wanted to seem unthreatening. "Alyssa, sweetheart," she said, standing halfway as I approached. Her hand hovered like she might touch mine, then thought better of it. I slid into the booth across from them, careful not to let my coat brush either of their arms. The server brought water and disappeared before I could look up. A mercy. For a while we talked about nothing. Work, traffic, the weather. My mother mentioned something about a gallery opening. My father said Boston drivers were getting worse by the day. I nodded, sipped water, let the silence build between sentences. They were waiting for the right moment. I gave it to them. The server returned to take our order. I chose something simple, grilled salmon. My mother ordered the risotto. My father asked for steak, medium, like always. We thanked the server, smiled politely, waited until she was gone. Then my father leaned back, folded his napkin across his lap, and said casually, "So? About the will." The words dropped like a lead pipe into the center of the table. My mother didn't flinch. She just picked up her wine glass and looked at me as if we were continuing a conversation already in motion. "It's a complicated situation, honey. We know that. And we want to make sure you're thinking it through." I said nothing. My fork hovered over my bread plate. "I mean, it's a lot of money," she continued, her voice gentle, faux reasonable. "And your grandmother, well, she was very emotional at the end." "She was also lucid," I said. "Every day." My father raised an eyebrow. "Even in her final weeks?" "Especially in her final weeks." There was a pause, the kind that feels choreographed. My mother set her glass down. "We just think it's unfair," she said softly, "that she didn't consider how that decision would affect the rest of the family." My laugh came out sharp. "Unfair?" She blinked at me. "Don't take that the wrong way. We just mean, maybe it would feel better to everyone if things were more evenly shared." My father nodded like this made perfect sense. "You've always been sensible, Alyssa. We're not asking for anything extreme, just something equitable." "And what would that look like exactly?" I asked, voice steady. They didn't answer right away. They weren't ready for me to ask. My father cleared his throat. "Half," he said finally. "Half would be reasonable. You know your mother and I are close to retirement. And your cousin, she's still paying off that dental school debt." I stared at them, stunned by the ease with which they made demands wrapped in silk. "So you're asking me to give you over $300,000, I said slowly, "because it would make everyone feel better." "It's not about the money," my mother said quickly. "It's about doing the right thing." "According to who?" I asked. That shut her up for a moment. The server returned with our meals. We all straightened, smiled, pretended nothing had just happened. When she left, my father picked up his knife and fork, like we'd simply been discussing weekend plans. "You have to admit," he said between bites, "keeping all of it just doesn't look good. It could raise questions." I set my silverware down. Questions for who? "For the extended family," my mother answered. "You know how people talk. And legal matters aside, appearances still matter." There it was. The real fear. Not justice. Not fairness. Optics. "You didn't call me once during those months," I said quietly. "Not once. Not when she got the diagnosis. Not when she fell. Not when the nurse said we'd entered hospice." My mother pressed her lips together. "We didn't want to intrude." "You weren't intruding," I said. "You were absent." They didn't deny it. They didn't apologize. They just looked at me like they were waiting for me to hand over the check. I folded my napkin slowly, set it beside my plate, and met their gaze. "No," I said. My mother blinked. "No to what?" "No to dividing it. No to pretending this is about family. No to rewriting history so you come out looking generous." My father's jaw tensed. My mother's voice thinned. "Alyssa, be reasonable." "I am," I said, rising from the booth. "I've never been more reasonable in my life." They watched me gather my coat like I was walking away from something precious. But I wasn't. I was walking toward the only thing I had left: my dignity. The next morning, I took the early train back to Maine. It wasn't sentiment that pulled me there. It was strategy. Edson Fallow's office wasn't sleek or convenient, but I trusted it more than the glass-towered law firms my parents were probably calling by now. There was something grounding about Edson's place, tucked behind the bait shop, the scent of sea salt and old paper settling into the corners. He met me at the door with his usual mild nod, a mug of coffee in one hand and a folder in the other. "Figured I'd be seeing you," he said simply. Inside, we didn't waste time. Edson opened the folder and spread the documents out across the scratched oak desk. Notarized pages, witness affidavits, a letter of intent signed in Grandma's distinctive slanted script. "She made it very clear," he said, tapping the letter. "She wanted you to have peace. Not just money, peace." I swallowed, throat tight. "I just need to know it'll hold," I said. "They're already circling." He didn't flinch. "It'll hold." She updated everything properly. We filmed the session, had it transcribed. The witnesses were neutral third parties. She anticipated pushback, especially from your mother. Of course she did. I leaned over the desk, rereading the highlighted sections. I remembered the day she made me promise to drive her into town, said she had errands, and refused to elaborate. She wore her good shoes, the ones that pinched, and a coat with missing buttons. I didn't realize until now how much planning had gone into that visit. "She protected you," Edson added softly. I nodded, afraid that if I spoke, something inside me might crack. It wasn't just about the inheritance. It was the act of being chosen, of being seen. When I returned to Boston that evening, I half expected a storm outside my apartment, a confrontation on the stoop, my parents or someone they'd sent waiting in the shadows. But the street was quiet. My building still smelled like dust and hallway soup. I took the stairs 2 at a time, locked the door behind me, and slid the chain into place. The calm didn't last. The calls started again the next day. Unknown numbers, blocked IDs, the same silence on the other end when I answered, always breathing, never speaking. Then the letters began. Folded notes slipped under my door, 2 of them. The first was typed, formal, emotionless. "We are seeking legal counsel. This matter is far from resolved." The second was handwritten, shaky, just 5 words. "Be careful who you trust." No signature. I read it 3 times, trying to match the handwriting to anyone I knew. The curve of the T, the sharp slant of the W. Nothing familiar. That night, I triple-locked my door and dragged the armchair across it. I kept the lights on, the television playing some forgettable sitcom just to have noise. My phone lit up with a message from my cousin Lena. "Just a heads up. Mom's been saying some weird stuff to the extended family. Something about you controlling Grandma near the end. I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on." That was the moment it clicked. It wasn't just about the money anymore. They were rewriting the story. I stared out the window at the city lights. The world below kept turning. Traffic, laughter, the occasional siren. But inside my apartment, something else was shifting. The game had changed. They weren't trying to negotiate now. They were preparing to attack. It came at night, of course. Everything that unsettles me these days does. I'd just finished rinsing out my coffee mug when I saw it. An envelope, white and unmarked, slipped beneath my front door. I hadn't heard anything. No footsteps in the hall. No knock. Just the quiet hush of paper on wood. I stared at it for a full minute. Then I picked it up. No return address. No name. Inside, a single piece of lined notebook paper, folded neatly in thirds. No signature. Just 5 words, scrawled in blocky, uneven handwriting. "Be careful who you trust." The letters were tilted slightly to the left, the ink a faded gray-blue like it had been written with a cheap pen. No curve, no flourish, just the bluntness of someone who wanted to warn me or rattle me. My heart thudded in a slow, measured rhythm. I reread the note, trying to find meaning in the spaces between the words. The phrasing wasn't threatening, not directly, but it wasn't kind either. It was loaded, a pressure point, and it wasn't random. I turned it over, searching for any detail I might have missed. A smudge, a fingerprint, a clue. Nothing. The hallway outside was empty when I opened the door. The air was still, the kind of stillness that only feels eerie when you're looking for shadows. Back inside, I paced. I checked every lock, double-checked the chain, even jammed a rubber wedge under the door. My windows were closed, latched tight. I hadn't had this kind of paranoia in years, not since high school, when I used to keep a chair under my bedroom knob because I couldn't stand the sound of silence behind my father's door. This was different, though. Sharper, more adult. I wasn't afraid of being hurt. I was afraid of being framed. My phone buzzed. "Lena, you okay? Heard anything more?" I hesitated, then typed back. "Me. I just got a note. Slipped under my door. No name. Just, be careful who you trust. Lena." Jesus. "Lena, you think it's my mom?" I didn't answer right away. Could it be her? Sure. My aunt had always been a gossip fiend, but she was never subtle. This felt quieter, measured. The kind of warning someone sends when they still think you might listen. Or maybe it wasn't a warning at all. Maybe it was a threat disguised as advice. I thought about the last time I'd seen Lena's younger brother, Ethan. He always gave me that too long hug, the one that made my shoulders tense. Too familiar, too curious. He'd visited Grandma only once before she passed, and even then, he'd spent more time asking me where the will was kept than actually sitting with her. Was it him? Or was I just spiraling? I hated that I couldn't tell. Later that night, I buzzed the front desk. "Hey, Ron," I said to the doorman. "Did anyone come up to the 4th floor around 9? Deliveries, maintenance, anything?" He hesitated. "Just a guy dropping off flyers. Said he was from the building management. Wore a gray jacket." "Why? Did he say what unit he was going to?" "Nope. Just that he had stuff for multiple floors. He signed in under T. Marsh." I didn't recognize the name. I thanked him, hung up, then sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, turning the note over in my hands like it might reveal more under different light. Maybe I was overreacting. Or maybe I wasn't reacting enough. I scanned the room. I hadn't noticed how exposed I was here. Glass windows without curtains, a door anyone could walk up to. I suddenly felt like I was living in a fishbowl. I gathered the estate documents, everything Edson had given me, and locked them in the fireproof safe I kept beneath my bed. Then I slid my grandmother's photo inside too, just in case. There's a particular kind of fear that comes when you realize the danger isn't loud. It whispers. It slips through cracks. It wears a smile, calls you sweetheart, and shows up at your door with a hot dish and cold intentions. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on top of the covers, staring at the ceiling, trying to make peace with one simple, unsettling truth. It's not just the inheritance they want. It's the story. And they're already rewriting it. It started with a headline. I was midway through writing a report on protein synthesis markers when Ivy, my coworker, slid her phone across the lab bench toward me. Her expression was tight. "Is this about you?" The screen showed a tabloid-style article. Heiress accused of manipulating grandmother's will. Family claims elder coercion in $770,000 inheritance battle. There was a photo, me and Grandma, taken 2 summers ago, sitting on the porch in matching flannel, both of us smiling like fools. Someone had pulled it from my private Facebook. The room went cold around me. I scrolled through the piece, sensationalist, poorly sourced, but it didn't matter. They'd gotten the bones of the story. A granddaughter, a sizable inheritance, a change of will, and parents who expressed concern for their mother's mental state. They even quoted a family source saying I'd been controlling access to Martha's medications and mail in her final weeks. I hadn't. I'd done everything exactly as instructed. kept her schedule, followed her doctor's guidance, made sure the hospice nurses had what they needed. But the article didn't want facts. It wanted friction. And now the world had a story. By the time I left work, my inbox was flooded. Reporters, bloggers, even someone claiming to be writing a memoir on family legacy disputes. Ivy stood by my desk, concern stitched across her forehead. "You okay?" I nodded, but it was automatic. I wasn't okay. I was humiliated. I was exposed. When I got home, I found my building superintendent standing in the hallway, arms folded. "Got some folks asking around today," he said, voice gruff. Said they were old friends. They weren't. I thanked him, locked my door, drew every curtain. Then I called Edson. "They're playing the long game," he said after I explained. "This isn't about winning in court. It's about ruining your image so you'll cave." I thought of my parents' tight, pleasant smiles over risotto, of the note, of the way people empowered don't need facts, they just need doubt. That night, I couldn't eat, couldn't think. So I did the only thing I hadn't done since the will was read. I opened the cedar box Grandma gave me and pulled out her handwriting journal, the one we'd filled together on the worst nights when her bones ached too much to sleep. Inside were entries, grocery lists, letters to her old friends, pages of half-baked poems, and then, folded between 2 pages about bread recipes, I found it. A note, yellowed and faded, her writing unmistakable. "Alyssa, if you're reading this, I'm gone, but I want you to know. I was never manipulated. I chose you because you were there when no one else was. You made my final days gentle. That's not control. That's love. Don't let them twist it. Nate M." I sank to the floor with it, my back against the kitchen cabinet, heart beating like a drum. It wasn't legally binding. It wasn't notarized. But it was real. It was her. And suddenly, I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting to protect the truth. I closed my eyes and let myself remember. Maine, early spring, cold but bright. The smell of wood smoke drifting through the window. I was seated beside her bed, notebook in hand. Her voice had weakened, but her mind? Sharp as ever. "You know they'll come for it," she'd said then, eyes twinkling. "And for you." "I don't want it," I'd whispered. "But I want you to have it," she replied, "because you never asked." I'd held her hand then, frail but firm in mine. Now, holding her note, I finally understood. She hadn't just left me the money, she'd left me the burden of protecting her legacy. I didn't dress to impress. Just black slacks, a clean blouse, and Grandma's gold locket, worn inside my collar, close to the skin. I wasn't there to prove I deserved anything. I was there to remind them I already had. The courthouse was colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in energy. Polished floors, echoing shoes, the thick, sterile quiet of people waiting to be judged. Edson met me just outside the courtroom, his satchel already unzipped, papers organized by color-coded tabs. "It's a formality," he murmured, voice steady. "You know that, but they'll still try to rattle you." "They already have," I said, and they failed. Inside, my parents were seated at the plaintiff's table, flanked by attorneys who looked like they'd stepped out of a commercial. Sharp suits, practiced empathy. My mother glanced at me, then quickly looked away. My father didn't look at me at all. The judge was deliberate, her voice calm as she reviewed the complaint. Allegations of undue influence, elder coercion, medical mismanagement. The opposing counsel stood, polished, smiling, rehearsed. "They're painting a picture," Edson whispered, "not presenting a case. But the picture didn't matter, not when the facts were printed in black and white." When it was my turn to speak, I stood with a calm I didn't expect to feel. "I didn't coerce my grandmother," I said. "I cared for her, every single day. I was the one who clipped her toenails when she couldn't reach, the one who learned how to puree broccoli." The one who stayed up reading the same chapter aloud, over and over, because she said it helped her sleep. I reached into my folder and handed the judge the handwritten note, creased at the folds, her signature curling gently at the bottom. "This was found in her handwriting journal," I said. "She left it between pages about bread and chores." That's where her truth lived, not in legal language, but in the little moments. The judge read it silently, lips moving just slightly. Across the aisle, my mother's mouth twisted. My father shook his head, the barest tick of disbelief. Or maybe regret. But I didn't look at them long, because the moment that followed was the one I'd been bracing for, and it arrived like a tide going still. "The court finds no evidence of undue influence or coercion," the judge said. "The will is upheld. There were no gasps, no outbursts, just silence, cold and immediate." My parents stood to leave almost before the judge had finished speaking. My mother paused at the doorway, looked back at me with eyes that might have held something like apology, if I squinted. But it was too late for translation. Outside, the air hit me like spring after a long Maine winter, bright, fresh, real. Edson joined me on the steps, papers clutched under one arm. "You held your ground," he said. "No," I replied. "She held it for me. I just stayed standing." He nodded, and for the first time in months I let myself breathe fully. The kind of breath that fills not just your lungs, but your ribs, your spine, your whole sense of self. I didn't smile. Not yet. But something inside me unknotted. Later that evening, back in my apartment, I made tea, not because I needed it, but because it felt like something Martha would have done. I opened the window and let the breeze in. Noticed the quiet. Not the hollow kind, not the frightened kind. This quiet was mine. No more phone calls. No more notes under the door. No more dinners laced with sugar and threat. Just space. Just stillness. And somewhere inside it, the faintest whisper of a woman who once said, "You made my final days gentle." That was the inheritance no one could touch.